Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be opening up the 2013 Anguille Sous Roche deck. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Don't speak whatever language that is. I think it's French. Anyway, today we're going to be opening this deck here. It is the 2013 Worlds deck used by, I believe, Senior Division finalists to take second place, losing to, I believe, a Team Plasma deck, or was it a Keldeo deck? I don't remember. We looked through the booklet in the last episode where we opened up the Team Plasma deck from the same year, so check that out if you want to see the booklet and stuff. We're going to go a little bit faster this time, just because I presume that most people have watched the previous one. But if you want to see the nitty-gritty details, go ahead and look back at that one. We're going to be cracking this open today. Did get these for both. It cost me like $100 for both of them, so very, very good deal in the modern day. Especially this one, you will see, is a very expensive deck, which we got for a very good deal. So again, we're not going to go through the booklet, but we'll just quickly skip to the section where it's our boy here, Clément. And here we are. So he is, I believe that's France. Yes, France. I guessed right on the language. Yay, look at me go. This is the RayEels deck. I know it's got its own name, but essentially the deck, for all other languages and purposes, we call it RayEels because it's Rayquaza and it's got eels. That's the name of the game for this deck. I am quite fond of this deck in terms of this year because it's just, I like eels. Not a huge fan of Rayquaza, but I like eels quite a lot, so I'm a little bit biased for this deck. This isn't the greatest year to play competitive Pokemon, but I mean, this deck's kind of cool. I'm not gonna lie. I can't lie. I like my eels decks. Big fan of Zekiels, RayEels, Zebstrika eels. I don't know. You know, you can throw anything with that as long as it's got a lightning type on it, or lightning energy requirement, in fact. So we have our two front cards there. One of them is notably an Ace spec. We have our pin, which just give that a quick show. And our deck box, once again, very nice deck box that they have thrown in here. Thrown about half the cards in there, so we got to go dig them out. There we are. We do have a code card. I'm going to probably, since it's an extra one, I think I'll give it away on Twitter, so look forward to that. You probably actually already missed it by the time of this upload, because it'll probably be uploaded about a month after I open it. Sorry about that. So let's move that aside and grab the rest of the deck. And we'll get right to the profile. So nice, clear, readable signature on this one. I can't read Japanese, so the other one was a little difficult for me. I'm working on my Japanese. We'll get there. We'll get there. Friend convinced me to start learning, so I have been working on Duolingo, which I know is not a proficient way to learn the language, but I am, you know, I've watched anime for years, so it's kind of picking up words that I already kind of knew and kind of like being like, okay, well, this is what this means in full. And it doesn't seem like much, but I'm getting there. I've got like maybe 100 words down at this point. So eventually we'll start forming conversations. Everything's really baby steps, people. Like, I've worked on learning Spanish before, and it's really just take your baby steps, get there however you can get there. Because it's a good thing to learn another language. Teacher ranting aside, this deck is terribly warped, unfortunately, with the EXs, but that's fine because we'll get, or with Pokemon in general, we'll get this in sleeves after the video. I do have the sleeves prepared, but I'm not going to do this on recording to save you some time. So let's get right into with our. I always start with 4-copy Pokemon. I prefer that over starting just with the, you know, Pokemon that's the star deck. I like just doing it based on copies. It looks pretty. 4 copies of Tynamo. These are going to fall in on each other because they're so warped. This is a decade old, to be fair. This is the 40 HP Tynamo, not my personal choice, but I get why they play it. 40 HP, Thunder Wave, does 10 and flip coins of head paralysis, so it does have a good attack on it. The reason that I don't usually play this Tynamo when I played Eels decks, or at least split the Tynamo counts, is because there's a 30 HP one with Free Retreat. But the problem with the 30 HP one in this format is that there's 2 Pokemon, Darkrai and Kyurem, that both hit 30 damage to the bench with their attacks. So you do kind of have to play the 40 HP one in this format, or at least split the counts down the middle. Or like a 3-1, maybe you could split like 3-1 with one of the Free Retreat guys. I like the Free Retreater, but I get he's not good in this format. It's just a personal bias. 4 copies of Eelektrik. This is our main piece of the deck with its Dynamotor ability. which once during your turn you may accelerate a lightning energy from your discard pile to one of your benched Pokemon. Does not have to be a lightning Pokemon, could just be anything. So very notable in this deck because we're going to be powering up Ray. That's why it's called RayEels, because we got Rayquaza to power it up. It's also got Electric Ball, which does 3 energy 50. You'll notice if you played Flaffy, which recently rotated out of the standard format, had the same HP, same ability, and its attack was called Electro Ball for 50 damage. So they weren't too, you know, they were a little too obvious, I think, with copying their homework there. Trying to make RayEels a thing again with Rayquaza VMAX, but Rayquaza VMAX never very good, unfortunately. Did see a tiny bit of play, I know, but never great. 3 copies of Rayquaza EX. This is our main attacker of the deck with 170 HP. He's pretty big, but he hits even bigger than he is himself. Celestial Roar is our first deck. Discard the top 3 cards of your deck. If any of them are energy, attach them to this Pokemon. You don't usually want to use this attack. It's pretty destructive and not a lot of recovery in this format, so you don't want to get rid of important attackers that you'll have to worry about getting back later. If this deck even plays any recovery, I'm not sure if it does. Because this is a pretty destructive deck. We have Dragon Burst, which for Fire and Lightning does 60 times. Discard all basic Fire or basic Lightning attached to Rayquaza, and you do 60 for each one you discard. You can't discard all energy attached to Rayquaza if you do either Fire or Lightning. In this deck, we're going to always be doing Lightning because that's the energy we can get back with Electric. But it is notable that after Electric rotated after this World Championship, Raybor was actually a deck born based on its pairing of its fire typing with Emboar, so it got to use both of its types, which was kind of cool for a dragon Pokemon to be good enough to see play both as an electric attacker in this deck and as a fire attacker with Emboar. So very, very cool thing there. Raybor's cooler, honestly, though, because I do love my Stage 2 boxes, because it also plays Stealth Fox as an attacker. Then we have 2 copies of Keldeo. Kelly is here with Rush In. Once during your turn, if it's on your bench, you can switch it with your active Pokemon. So this was played at the time because of a Selgor. A Selgor was everywhere around US Nats, I believe. It won Nats, if I remember correctly, or took second place, one of the two. And essentially a Selgor has an attack that paralyzes your active Pokemon, and then they promote the Gothitelle on the item lock. And that deck, if it gets fully set up where it's just spamming a Selgor every single turn, or rather using Mew usually to copy a Selgor, that way it makes it easier because you don't have to find a Stage 1. Essentially, if they just use that every turn, they'll win the game if they get their Dusknoir out. And they're item locking you, so you can't switch. It's a really bad time. But Keldeo kind of helps with that. And by kind of, I mean it kind of destroys it. Because Keldeo uses Rush In to switch to the active spot, and it breaks the paralysis lock, and then you can easily just retreat Keldeo to whatever your attacker is and smack them. But one of the issues with Keldeo that may become is it's like, okay, well, you have a Keldeo in play, then they can just gust your Keldeo and paralyze Keldeo, and then Keldeo's stuck. That's why we run 2 Keldeo, because they can't paralyze 2 of them at once. So that's your way to beat a Selgor. Next up, we have 1 copy of Raikou EX. This is one of the big gatekeepers, honestly, of me building this deck. I have everything else to build this deck, just with the real cards, but I never owned the Raikou. I say real cards, I don't have beaches. We don't got those. Raikou with 170 HP as well, and the Thunder Fang attack does 30, flip a coin of heads, paralysis. Not awful, but not going to be used very often unless it's an emergency. Its main attack is Volt Bolt for 3 energy, does discard all lightning energy attached to its Pokemon, does 100 to one of your opponent's Pokemon, so just a very good sniping attack. Unfortunately, it's very expensive these days. Dark Explorers cards in general are just very expensive. This one never got a reprint either, which is unfortunate. It really should have gotten a reprint in like one of the Legendary Treasures or something, because it was very playable. Same with Electric. Electric should have also gotten reprinted, but they didn't reprint him either. Very odd. So just a good snipe attacker. Can help you chase down Pokemon on the bench. Also just 100 damage, pretty good. Kills single prizers. 1 copy of Victini. This is our single prize attacker of choice. You'll notice that Ray decks either tend to play the single prize Rayquaza, which is cooler because of theming, but or they play Victini, which I think is just generally the better single prize attacker. Victini has the V-Create attack, which attacks for 2 energy, so 1 fire, 1 colorless. It is notable it does take a fire, so you do have to be ready to commit one of your few fire energy there. But it does 100 damage. If you have 4 or fewer bench Pokemon, this deck does nothing. So you do have to have a full bench. However, it does 100 damage. So this helps us get through single prizers, helps us get through walls. There's things like Safeguard, Sigilif. which just can't be damaged by EX Pokemon like Rayquaza, that you can use Victini to break through. And just generally good for single prize attacker. Also against Klinklang, which is very popular at the time. Klinklang prevents all damage done to your metal Pokemon by EXs, and Victini just gets in there and hits for fire weakness and just cuts right through the deck like butter. So do not play Klinklang versus Rayquaza. It's going to be a miserable time for Klinklang if they have the Victini. The other Rayquaza that this deck likes to play as a single prizer has just a 1 energy, 40, discard the top 2 cards of your deck, really bad attack. But it's mainly played for Shred, which does 90, go through all effects. And the reason you play that over Victini, if you decide to play it, is because it's a little bulkier, and because it hits opposing Rayquaza EX and opposing Black Kyurem EX, which is another dragon type, for weakness. Because dragons back then were weak to dragon. So if you see decks running Rayquaza, that is why. Personally, I think Victini's better, and I like this Victini quite a lot. Next up with the supporter line, we have 4 copies of Juniper. This is the best draw supporter at the time. Discard your hand, draw 7. Still the best today, honestly, with research. But a lot of decks nowadays can't really afford to discard their hands as much, so they're playing a lot more shuffle, draw, and search, things like Arvin. So back then, wasn't really the case. Just keep drawing cards. There's not a lot of onboard draw in this format, so a lot of things are kind of luck-based. You get some deck building quirks, and you get some control decks that can definitely make games hard for your opponent. But a lot of things are just based on what you draw. You play that and keep going. Really aggro decks at the time. Evolutions were hard to keep in play. So that's why all these decks focus on big basics, like Rayquaza. Then we have 4 copies of N. It's like Iono. Each player shuffles their hand to their deck and draws cards for each of their prize cards. So you do shuffle it instead of put to the bottom, so it's a little worse than Iono because it's not as good of a draw card in the early game, and it's not as good as disrupting your opponent in the late game, because usually you don't want to give them the same cards, where N has a chance to give them the same cards. Iono puts it to the bottom, so you can't get those cards back, at least without doing something to draw them. But very good disruption card, very good draw card. 4 of them basically every deck. Every deck pretty much is going to play 4 Juniper 4N without exception from this era. 3 copies of Colress. Each player shuffles their hand to the deck and then draws 1 for each of the number of bench Pokemon, both yours and your opponent. So you can eventually draw up to 10 with this, and there's a lot of decks in the format that do have big benches. I'm still not a huge fan of Colress in every deck, but it's particularly good, at least in this format, because decks like Team Plasma are always going to have a full bench. So you get a lot of value out of that Colress, and you also want multiple Eels on the bench, preferably at a time, so you can just have a lot of Eels. One thing this deck doesn't play that I'm not a huge fan of is it's missing the Mr. Mime from Plasma Freeze, which just came out at this time. So maybe it just wasn't experimented with enough. But Mr. Mime is a bench barrier that prevents all damage done to your bench Pokemon by attacks, which is just really important. There's a lot of sniping attacks, like I mentioned Kyurem before, and Darkrai. This deck's biggest weakness is that eventually, over a game, your opponent's just going to be able to take knockouts on your Eels if they have any spread damage on their attacks, which is a little scary to deal with. That's why I prefer to eel with things rather than deal with things, right? Next up, we have 4 copies of Level Ball. This is one of my favorite search cards. Search your deck for Pokemon with 90 HP or less and put it into your hand. So obviously in this deck it gets all of our Eels, and it notably gets Victini as well, so there's another benefit for the Victini gang. Mainly it's just getting our Eels, though. We need to get these Eels out in play so we can start swinging, and every time we swing we have to lose our energy, so no matter it's Rayquaza or Raikou, we losing that energy, and Victini's probably dying, so he's probably also losing the energy. We need our Eels out to get those energy back. Next up, we play 4 copies of Ultra Ball. Ultra Ball, discard 2 cards from your hand, search your deck for a Pokemon, and put it into your hand. Just really good to get your Pokemon out of the deck. Does get things that Level Ball doesn't, like Rayquaza, Keldeo, and Raikou. Notably, does also discard energy for Eelektrik to accelerate back to the play. So, yeah, good synergy. Ultra Ball, also a very staple card this time. 3 copies of Catcher. Catcher is the item card that acts like Boss's Orders. Switch one of your opponent's active Pokemon with one of their bench. So, just gust anything you want on an item card. Pretty broken. That's why you don't see too many Stage 2s around this time that aren't just like Klinklang, where they just win a game if they get their Stage 2 in play, or Gothitelle, which is like a very similar thing. If they get their setup, you just lose. You see a lot more Stage 2 decks like that versus like Stage 2 decks that are relying on attacking with Stage 2s over and over again. But, every format has its quirks. 2 copies of Super Rod. is normally playing the Dragon Vault print, which would normally be hollow, but this one, of course, is a Worlds card, so it's not. Shuffle 3 in a combination of Pokemon and Basic Energy into the deck. So I said we need Recovery earlier because we're really destructive. We have Recovery now. That's good. 2 copies of Rod feels pretty cool. 1 copy of Energy Search. Search your deck for a Basic Energy, reveal it, and put it into your hand. We play 2 different types of Basic Energy in the deck, so I think it's just kind of nice to have that. Though I'm not a huge fan of it, I would probably cut it if it was my own list. But, you know, I didn't take second to the Worlds in 2013, so who am I to talk? When I was in 2013, like I said, I was playing my Kyurem, White Kyurem deck, which was not very good. 1 copy of Dowsing Machine. Discard 2 cards from your hand. Put a trainer card from your discard pile into your hand, so essentially you get to reuse any trainer card. This is such a broken card. Most decks of the time play Computer Search, and I think RayEels should play Computer Search. However, I'm happy that this deck plays Dowsing Machine, because I'm always a fan of seeing Dowsing Machine around. Just gives you a one-time reuse of your trainer cards. One thing that I don't love in this deck, though, is there's not a lot of unique trainer cards. Usually Dowsing Machine decks, especially around 2014, XY, like Cities format, a lot of decks ran a lot of unique trainer cards to reuse with Dowsing Machine, because the benefit of Dowsing Machine is when you run a lot of tech trainers, you know, something like Enhanced Hammer in the deck would be really cool to see to reuse with Dowsing Machine. Instead, it's just got a lot of like staples that might just be better if you run Computer Search to find them more consistently. Moving on to the tools, we have 4 copies of Floatstone. They're sliding once again. These are terribly warped. The Pokemon this card's attached to has no retreat cost. Broken tool card. Attach this to any Pokemon, you get free retreat. Notably Keldeo, we want to bring that up with its ability and give it free retreat so it can retreat back to the bench. And also, it can retreat or can stay active while Electric charges up our next benched attacker, and then we retreat into that attacker. So, very good card. Running 4 of makes sense in this deck. There's also just not a lot of good tools in this format, honestly. 3 copies of Tropical Beach. This is a big win for this deck. Because I got this deck. This was the $60 deck. I said I bought them for $100 total. The Plasma one was like $40. This one was like $60. It makes sense because Tropical Beach is like $30 a copy for this fake Tropical Beach right here. And there's 3 of them in this deck. So yeah, I just paid for the deck with these 3 beaches. Insane Stadium card. The reason that this card is so expensive, despite being a Worlds promo, is because the real one is several $100s. Why is the real one $700? Several hundred, not 700. To be fair, it would be like 700. It's because it is a Worlds promo, so it was only given to competitors who went to the World Championships. How a Seniors Division player managed to get 4 of them is kind of crazy. Shout out to this guy for getting 3 of them. Because they were not easy to get a hold of, I imagine, back then. Because they were playable in lots of decks. Lots and lots of decks need a Tropical Beach to play the game. It's a very good card. What does the card actually do? I've been talking about it for a while. What does it do? It is a Stadium card that, once during each player's turn, they may end their turn by drawing until they have 7 in hand. So, just really good in these setup decks. It's also a good Stadium bump for the evil Hypnotoxic Laser Verbank City combo that was moving around at the time. So a lot of Verbank Cities in play, so you can bump it with Tropical Beach, and it gives you a good setup effect. Like I said, we're usually not going to be using Rayquaza's first attack. If we're using anything on turn 1, it's probably going to be a Tropical Beach to draw more cards while we get our attackers set up. Or get our eels set up, mainly. Moving on to the energy. You'll notice the deck has a lot of trainers in it, but also a lot of energy, because we need to do Rayquaza's big attacks. 4 copies of Lightning, except it's actually 8 copies of Lightning. Misspoke there. Didn't have the ready. 8 copies of Lightning Energy. This is the main energy we use because we can power it back up with Electric to swing again with our Rayquaza's Dragon Burst attack. We also need it for Raikou, and it's just a good thing to have lots of Lightning Energy. Because this deck uses Victini, it does actually use a lot of fire energy. Usually RayEels decks, or Raybor decks, sorry, the like reverse deck of this that plays more fire and less lightning would play like 3 lightning. This one plays 4 fires though, and that's because we have Victini. And Victini needs fires to attack, so we play 4 fire energy, just enough to usually get our 3 Rayquazas through the game, but also enough where we can switch into Victini if we need to and start attacking with that. Anyway, my voice is going dry. This has been 2013 RayEels or Anguille Sous Roche deck. I don't speak French, so you have to forgive me for that one. Yeah, it's been a deck. It's been a format. Please check out the last opening if you didn't on the Team Plasma deck. I don't think I'll be getting any more 2013 decks, especially not sealed, so this is probably the last video you see of these decks in specific on the channel. but you'll see them played in a video sometime very soon, hopefully next year. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.